The ACC learned lessons from the Pac-12. Good for them.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your daily source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in this, the greatest sport on planet Earth. Miami spring practice observations and who their most important transfer is. And Syracuse could do what in the next recruiting class? I've got a hot take, not from me, but from someone else on that very matter. But Alex Donno, Locked On Canes, Locked On ACC, joining me here first to discuss the story of the day, Donno, which is FSU and Clemson are backing off, saying, all right, we'll stay in the ACC, at least till like 2030 or so. But the reason they got to that place after suing to want to leave the conference is they were able to get serious financial concessions from the ACC because they feel, and they're not wrong necessarily in saying, hey, we're generating more revenue here, so we should get more of it. And this was something the Pac-12, had they explored back in the day, George Kliavkoff, perhaps the title of this show would be different than it currently is. But alas, here we are. So your reaction to the FSU and Clemson news that at least until 2030, they will be members of the ACC.
Well, first of all, this is pretty monumental that they're reaching an agreement here, because throughout a lot of the different court proceedings and the accusations that both sides, the sides being Florida State and Clemson versus the ACC, had been making at each other, it felt like they were a long way away to coming to any sort of a settlement. So the fact that they can put these legal matters behind them, I think is monumental, and that's important. In terms of like my initial reaction on Monday afternoon, when I first started to get the notifications that a settlement is about to happen, my initial reaction was like, oh, this seems like this is a big win for Jim Phillips, ACC commissioner, and the conference. And, you know, there are ways where it is a win for the ACC, which we'll discuss. But then when I started to read into all the details, it feels like an even bigger win for Florida State and Clemson. Like they really feel like the winners in this settlement. Now, obviously, we know these lawsuits started over them not wanting to be in the ACC anymore. So one could say, hey, well, they're stuck for at least another 5 years. How's that a win? But it is a win because they're getting what they want, Spencer, because what Florida State and Clemson wanted initially, and you mentioned it, was an opportunity at a significantly higher revenue split. And that revenue split, and this is something that I'll use the word again, monumental, that the ACC has agreed to, because we've never seen this happen before, actually agreed to uneven revenue splits. And a big part of that comes from how big your brand is, right? There's a couple different initiatives that the ACC is using. One of those, which is already in place, is the Success Initiative, which means how much you win in football and how much you win in basketball. You reach certain milestones like, you know, a bowl game being a lower milestone, ACC championship game, college football playoff, how deep you go in the playoff. That gives you an opportunity through your success on the field to earn more revenue. But then the other part of it is the brand initiative, which means if you get higher TV ratings than the rest of the conference, and of course, that puts Florida State and Clemson in a great position, also puts Miami in an improved position, North Carolina, when you think about some of the bigger brands in the conference. We'll see how sustainable this is, but I'll even throw Georgia Tech some love because they actually had the highest total television rating in the entire conference last year, because their opening game against Florida State had a ton of viewers, and their 7 overtime game against Georgia was a ratings juggernaut. So
wasn't it 8? I think it was 8 overtimes.
Was it? I lost. I might have fallen asleep after the
I lost count at 5. I don't. Once we got off of one hand, I was done.
It was a lot of overtimes and a huge TV number. So, yeah, if the brand initiative had already been in place, Georgia Tech would have earned a nice bonus. Like, this gives schools an opportunity to earn about $15 extra million per season if you hit these initiatives, which would, you know, theoretically, and obviously this money is not guaranteed to you. You have to perform well and get good ratings, but gives you the opportunity to really close that gap almost completely with the Big Ten and SEC revenue. So That's the first reason why Florida State and Clemson are big winners here, because even though, they're stuck in the ACC for a little bit longer, they're getting what they wanted, which is a chance at majorly increased revenue. Now, the other part of it, which I think is a huge win for Florida State and Clemson, and I had a discussion about this on Locked On ACC on Monday night with Kenton Gibbs, and he strongly feels that the ACC gave up too much here, and I tend to agree with him. Now, I say that from a point of little bit of ignorance because I'm not privy to all the inside information on.
See, I don't know that they did, because if you make it performance and incentive based, it's not just a direct giveaway to FSU and Clemson.
I agree. I'm talking about something else. I'm with you on that. I don't think they gave up too much in that sense. Where I do think the ACC gave up too much is severely reducing potentially the amount of money it's going to cost to leave the conference in 2030, right? Where it's and that's what. So I'm with you. The initiatives I'm cool with. I think the initiatives are great. It makes sense. Like why should Clemson and Wake Forest make the exact same revenue share? It doesn't make any sense, really, considering who's bringing what to the table. But the part where I think the ACC is maybe giving up too much here is this idea, and we'll see the final settlement. Hopefully, we'll get a copy of it once this thing is all signed and ratified. Is that beginning from 2030? It's going to cost less than $100 million to buy your way out of the conference. And then that money, that fee is going to go down every subsequent year after that. So even though the ACC and ESPN are locked into this TV deal until 2036, the ACC has basically agreed 2030 and beyond, you can buy your way out at a somewhat affordable price tag.
Here's where I'll defend the league again, or at least pose what I think their argument would be if I were their PR spokesperson. And that's that you're supplying FSU and Clemson with a sufficient window to give this new revenue stream a real shot.
Okay.
And if you're able to showcase over that time, not only are you nationally competitive, but you're more financially competitive with the SEC and the Big Ten. I don't know that you can get to the same level, because those media rights contracts are $80-90 million, and going up over time and whatnot. That's per school, per year, which is a ton. But if you give them a 5-year span and showcase, hey, you can now get all of this, and this is where your financial earnings can be, and you are a bigger fish in a smaller pond in the ACC, and that's giving you better playoff access than going to try to find one of the spots in the Big Ten or the SEC. I think that's where the win comes in is, hey, we can take another look at this if you still want to leave in 5 or 6 years, but we think that you're going to like this new structure and you're going to benefit from it. That's where I would think the ACC is coming from.
See, I like that mindset. I do. And it's an angle I hadn't really thought of. And then the other angle that is true, that at least this would give the ACC an opportunity to have more notice if Clemson and Florida State do decide to leave, that you've got the next 5+ years to put yourself in a better position for a plan B. So Spencer McLaughlin, my friend, you have won me over with your optimism, because I will admit I've been pretty, from an ACC point of view, I've been pretty down on this. But another thing, and I know I mentioned this at the top, that I do think is this is a low-key, big-time win for schools like Miami and North Carolina, because honestly, I think that Miami, UNC, I'm thinking of like the two next biggest brands. They should probably send gift baskets to Florida State and Clemson, because let's remember, Miami and UNC have access to these same initiatives. It's not like the ACC just said, we're just going to give more money to Florida State and more money to Clemson. No, ACC is giving them the opportunity to earn more money, which is also an opportunity that Miami, UNC, Georgia Tech, you can go down the entire list. Everyone has the opportunity to make extra money of these same initiatives. And Miami and UNC get to reap the benefits of this, despite the fact that they did not spend millions of dollars in legal fees and spend the last 15, 16 months engaged in a pretty nasty dispute, which also in a lot of ways, like we've heard the terms thrown around more for Florida State even than Clemson, because Florida State's been more vocal. Like, are they a disruptive partner to their conference, right? Like Miami and UNC just got to kind of sit back and watch this all unfold.
Yeah, and the other thing for those schools and others is they don't have to deal with the potential threat of being in a significantly less competitive league,
Yeah.
right? Because FSU and Clemson are stank. So that means your league is going to be viewed on the same level as the Big 12, with these playoff proposals that I've discussed at length here on the show. If they go to a 14-team playoff where it's 2 bids each for the ACC and the Big 12 automatically, you take FSU and Clemson out, the Big 10 and SEC might say, you're 1 bid league now. You and the G5 get the same number of teams in there. So I don't think that's all bad news. I might explore this more on tomorrow's show as well. But we are going to explore Miami because, well, their spring football is now underway. Good news for the Hurricanes. First, this episode brought to you by Supply House. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades. Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from over 400 top brands, you'll find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast, kind of like the ACC now. Coast to coast conference. They've got coast to coast delivery. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Good news for Miami as spring football is underway in Coral Gables. Alex Donno, Locked On Canes here on the show with me. That good news, Donno, is not that Carson Beck is throwing, but that he doesn't have something on his elbow right now. And look, the college football season's a long ways away. I mean, it's way too far, but also it's kind of like 5.5 months away from getting going. It's August 31st that Carson Beck's got to be ready to go for Notre Dame coming to town. But your observations after their first spring practice?
Yeah, I got eyes on Carson Beck pretty quickly when I entered Miami's practice facility. And, I was happy to see that he did not have any sort of a sling or a brace on his right arm. He had surgery on his throwing elbow, shortly after he got injured in the SEC championship game. I've seen photos of him around campus before, but actually seeing him in practice. And of course, as you mentioned, he's not cleared to throw yet. I think that's going to happen pretty soon. But he was engaging in multiple drills that were non-throwing drills, which, makes sense because he's still able to run and move around. And there was no, risk of injuring himself by jostling his arm or anything like that. So, Beck was obviously not a full participant, but a pretty active participant in Miami's practice today. Mario Cristobal had an interview on SportsCenter late last week, and he had described Beck as being a couple of weeks away from being cleared to throw. So I think there's a chance that so Miami's got their first week of spring football this week. They're off next week for spring break, and then they're back the week after that. So I think if you're going to be very optimistic on the timetable, there is a possibility that Beck might be cleared to throw by the second week of spring football, which starts 2 weeks from now. So I'll be looking at that. But yeah, I mean, seeing him like very much engaged with practice and, doing what he can physically, I was pretty encouraged by that he might actually meet that timetable of being fully ready to go in a couple weeks.
The transfer portal to me is like how Thanos describes destiny. Dread it, run from it. Destiny still arrives. The portal arrives for everybody, Donno, and I just wonder with every team who your most important transfer is. Now, Carson Beck's the obvious answer for the Hurricanes, but there's plenty of turnover on this Miami roster from a season ago. So go beyond the quarterback position, and you'd say the most important transfer that Miami needs to push for an ACC championship and college football playoff spot is who?
I'm going to go with Xavier Lucas, the transfer corner out of Wisconsin. And he's
the guy who told us that the transfer portal doesn't actually exist?
Yeah, we can call him a transfer. We can't call him a transfer portal guy because he never actually entered the apparently the
for those who
portal.
Don't know what we're referring to here, I'll briefly bring you up to speed. This is all True. Typically, when athletes enter the transfer portal, there is an online window after compliance says, yes, you may enter the portal, and you go online, you put your name in there, and then you can be contacted by representatives of other schools. For some reason, Wisconsin really didn't want Xavier Lucas to be able to transfer. And so he found what you might call a loophole in which he just unenrolled from the University of Wisconsin, enrolled at the University of Miami, and joined the football team.
Yeah, and the NCAA was like, we can't do anything.
There's nothing they can do because he's still a student. And you can do this at any other school if you're not an athlete. And so it's the most hilarious story of the offseason. So I'm so glad that that's the most important new addition, but not a transfer, of course, that Miami has brought in this cycle, Donno.
And I had to say Lucas because Miami's defensive secondary, quite frankly, is the reason why they didn't make the college football playoff. I mean, they had the number one offense in America, but they couldn't stop a nosebleed defensively. And if anyone watched Miami games, you would notice that anytime an opposing receiver caught a football, there was not a Miami defender within 8 yards of them a lot of those times. Now, Miami did have one really good cover corner last year, but teams figured if we throw at anybody else, we're good. Like O.J. Frederick had a good season as a true freshman actually last year. I'm happy that he can have a guy like Lucas playing on the other side to make his life a little bit easier. You know, I got a little bit of a look at Xavier Lucas today. Again, it's hard to jump to too many conclusions on an unpadded spring football practice, but you could see the physicality. He's over 6 foot. I think he's like 6'2", 6'3", over 200 pounds. So a physical press man corner who's someone I think is really going to fit Miami's defensive philosophy this year. And yeah, I think Xavier Lucas is someone that Miami is really going to need to succeed on the field this year if they want to fix their biggest issue from last year, and that was defense, but specifically defending the pass, because they were quite porous in that area a season ago.
Well, they were just good enough defending Hail Marys, though. So that's all that we should take away.
Well, and a lot of people thought that should have counted. So it's like,
which is crazy. That was not like. I'm sorry, Virginia Tech.
I'm with you.
I love you guys in Blacksburg, but man, that was not a catch. But for Miami, Donno, new defensive coordinator coming in after last season did not go as planned. How do you feel like that can elevate Miami going into next year? Or how much, I think is the right way to look at it. Because the Hurricanes were 10-2 last year and, you know, had a 21-point lead against Syracuse, who I'm talking about later in today's show, by the way. Syracuse had a 21-point lead on the road, gave it up. And yeah, the offense slowed, but the defense just needed one stop here or there, and they could not find it. Do you think it's just a defensive coordinator that was missing for this team?
I think that was a big part of it. I mean, personnel, I can't say it was all on. Lance Guidry was the former defensive coordinator. I think a lot of it was on him. I can't say it was all on him because he could have used some better players, quite frankly. But I thought Guidry over-schemed, and I think that there was some confusion, and players were thinking too much, not reacting enough. And I know that the new defensive coordinator, Corey Heatherman, who comes down from Minnesota, had a lot of success last year with the Golden Gophers. Like, Heatherman emphasizes simplicity, of course, aggression, which I think you always want from a defensive coordinator, but a much more direct approach. Heatherman is also doubling as the linebackers coach at Miami, and you know, that was one of the things that Wesley Basaint, who's one of Miami's more experienced linebackers, he spoke to us reporters after practice today, and of course he appreciates the fact that his defensive coordinator is also his linebackers coach. So I think it's going to be a linebacker driven team this year. And, you know, Heatherman emphasizes stopping the run. He emphasizes, forcing takeaways. And so hopefully that gives Miami some opportunities because, yeah, the defense was really inexcusable. And I hate to blame all of it on the former defensive coordinator, but it was one of those things where he had to go. I know, maybe some folks will feel like he got scapegoated for it a little bit too much, but I think Miami needed to start fresh with better personnel and a different look at defensive coordinator. I also, not just the coordinator, I think Miami's made some really good hires in some of the assistant coach spots on defense because, as you'd imagine, you change coordinators, you're also changing most of the staffers. Like the only holdover on the defensive side from last year, this guy Miami really wanted to keep, that's Hall of Famer Jason Taylor, who is staying around as the defensive ends coach. Miami brings in a new defensive tackles coach, Damian Lewis, who they poached from Deion Sanders' staff in Colorado. Damian Lewis played at Miami, so that was probably an easy convincing Cristobal did to get him to come back home. Miami poached a defensive backs coach from Florida, Will Harris, who was pretty popular up there in Gainesville. And they got cornerbacks coach Zach Etheridge from Houston. So, and again, we'll see how they work together, right? Because the trick is how all these guys are going to mesh. But Damian Lewis and Will Harris specifically are a couple of guys that I'm really excited for on that staff because, I think they needed a defensive overhaul outside of Jason Taylor's really good recruiter, and I think was doing a good job with the defensive ends. I'm hoping the entire staff under Heatherman can just bring more consistency to that side of the football.
Consistency is key. I played golf earlier today, and consistency is really, really hard. And in football is also very, very hard. But it's easy to have fun with Alex Donno, Locked On Canes, Locked On ACC as well. We're staying in that conference because Brian Smith has got a take on Syracuse that you've got to hear. If you're looking for a bold take on Syracuse football, Brian Smith from Locked On the Portal is here to provide one. Brian, your take on Syracuse, who's suddenly surging on the trail and is becoming a name that everybody in the ACC's kind of looking around going, they're in on who? They're going after that kid. But you've got one take in particular. Why don't you share that take with the class?
Yeah, I think they'll get 7 players or more from the state of Florida. They've already got 3, and they might get Calvin Russell, who's possibly a 5-star wide receiver from none other than Miami Northwestern, one of the most famous high school football programs in the nation.
So you're telling me that the Syracuse Orange, who in recent memory have not even pulled a top 30 class, are going to walk into Florida State and Florida and heck UCF's and Miami's backyard and just walk out with 7 players? They've already got 3, but what exactly is shifting here for the Orange?
They won last year. They got 6 last year when they were building that class by winning, 6, 7, 8 games, whatever it was. But nobody thought they were going to win, go 500. And of course, at the end, they beat Miami after being down 21-0. That
9-3 regular season bowl game victory is a 10-win campaign.
There you go. I mean, nobody thought anything of Syracuse, myself included, because they just haven't been good for so long. But man, now all of a sudden it matters. And the one thing that is obvious based on me interviewing Calvin on Sunday, somebody said, "Hey, what is it about Syracuse? They got all the buzz with you. What is it?" He goes, "I'll give you a simple answer." He goes, "Fran Brown." And that was it. Fran recruits the top prospects himself, along with his staff. Most head coaches hate recruiting. Fran loves it. If you do not build relationships as the actual head coach in today's society, you will not get the elite players. And to put it mildly, we're talking about a kid that can go to any school in the country pretty much, 6'4", 6'5", 190 pounds. The very first play of one-on-ones right in front of me, he catches a jump ball over a kid. He's just that guy. So everybody's got their own reasons. That's fine, but it's just player after player after player. And again, they've got 3 kids committed already. Javon Cooper, Jarius Rogers, guys that were coveted by the big 3. And they're still committed to Syracuse.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much talent in the state of Florida that inherently, just getting 6 or 7 or 8 players from the state might not be all that impressive if you're going after, the lowest rated recruits that are out there. But they're starting to swing with the Miami, Florida State, who I presume are the big 3 in your view for these sorts of kids. But here's what's even more impressive to me about the fact that Syracuse is just in this position for Calvin Russell, Brian. They just lost their wide receivers coach. He just got hired away by Oregon, and yet Syracuse is still right there in the fold. How impactful was that first season? Is that what it's about, or is it about Fran Brown, as a recruiter, or is it both? And this is kind of the start potentially Syracuse building themselves up, because as I mentioned earlier, this has not been a program. They're located in New York, which has got some kids, but it's not a California, Texas, Florida type of area. But they have not been a top-tier recruiter. They have not even been a mid-tier recruiter, quite frankly. And all of a sudden, they're just going toe-to-toe with Miami.
It is what it is, man. Like, I think it's a combination. Winning helps. That never goes out of style. But it starts with relationships. They were building relationships last year before anybody thought they were any good, and they were getting kids on campus. And I remember then I'm like, what is going on? Like, I'd met Fran. I'm like, I get it. Why kids like him. Super positive guy. But once they won games last fall, it solidified that chance. And let's throw in another little caveat. Their offense is exciting. They threw the ball around. Kids like that stuff.
Leading passing offense in the country.
Yeah, that does matter. Fran knew how to throw the ball. That certainly helped. The only thing left now is can they get over the hump and do it 2 years in a row, because they're no longer the hunter, they are the hunted. That would solidify and get the kids they're committed to stick with them, and maybe get Russell, maybe get some other guys, but they need to continue on that path. And I don't see why not, because they're putting in the effort, and there's nothing wrong with that.
When Miami and other heavy hitters are going after a kid like Calvin Russell, do you give Syracuse a legitimate shot, or is it just newsworthy? I mean, it is newsworthy that they're in on a kid like that and they're a team to be considered, but is it a serious consideration, you think, from Russell's standpoint that, he could actually commit to Syracuse? Because to me, that would kind of ring similar vibes in my head to Tetaroa McMillan going to Arizona. He was down to Arizona and Oregon, and he chose Arizona. And many people, myself included, Oregon guy, said, wait a minute, he's going where? That program just won one game. I mean, they had a 12-game losing streak. What's going on? And that was a sign that Jed Fish was building the Wildcats into something really, really good. And I think Russell would, at least from a recruiting impact standpoint, have that same sort of impact if he were to go to the Orange.
And right now, if I had to pick, that's where I think he would go. There's another
Really?
one. Yeah. They're doing a good job. Now, for those that do not know, Calvin is a legit hooper. He wants to play basketball too. Syracuse, historically, that is an advantage. Man, that place is nuts, the Carrier Dome, all that. Maybe that'll help them. But this, again, the two words that came out of Calvin's mouth, and I'm from 3 feet away, Fran Brown. And I'm like, okay, that's straightforward. I appreciate the honesty. And it was like just boom. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. He thought that the best way to explain it was just giving the head coach, because he put so much effort into it. And he feels appreciated that Fran, not that other coaches don't at the head coaching position, but like he really tries to get to know him and put in the time. And I thought, you know what? That's going to sell with anybody. If you do that, you've got a better chance with any kind of line of work you're in. And recruiting is all relationships anyway. So do not be surprised when they get some more elite players out of Florida. Do not be surprised.
This would be something that will come up on the show again if Russell ends up committing to Syracuse, because that would be recruiting shockwaves and just turning people's heads going, he's going where? He's going to play for who exactly? But I'm glad you brought up the passing offense, because those sorts of things can become really identifiable traits for a school and the brand that they pitch to kids on the recruiting trail. Like, what do you think of with Ohio State? Their wide receiver U. Why? Because they keep recruiting, developing, and having wildly productive wide receivers that do things like win the Biletnikoff, get drafted in the top 10, or, it wasn't just, hey, we're Ohio State, we're going to go get Jeremiah Smith. It was the Chris Olaves, the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s, the Garrett Wilsons that, I'm sure factored into Smith's recruitment for him to say, yeah, Ohio State's the place I want to go because I know that I can get to that sort of level. Is that part of the consideration, you think, for Russell of, hey, if I go here and my ultimate goal is to make it to the NFL, I know I'm going to have the chance to put up some monster numbers?
I do believe so. He understands they're throwing the ball around. Calvin's a sharp kid. He's not stupid. He isn't going to go somewhere where they're going to run the ball down your throat and just that's the basic of the offense. He's not doing that. He wants to go somewhere he's going to get the football. He's a dominant player in the Miami Public League. He's been a freak ever since he was a little kid. Everybody knew he was kind of next up. So he wants to get a chance to shine. Syracuse's offense for a receiver makes sense. You're 100% right.
Yeah, and that makes it even crazier going into the time machine a bit, Brian, that Calvin Johnson went to Georgia Tech while they were just running. They were not some air it out, throw the ball kind of offense. And that's arguably the greatest receiver the NFL has had in the last 20 years.
Yeah, I remember interviewing him. He was just a Georgia Tech fan. They just walked into that one. That's it.
Man.
That was it. Because every school in the country offered him.
Recruiting's wild. I wonder if he would go to Georgia Tech in 2025 if he were coming out of high school.
There might be NIL discussions.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. Is like that discussion might not have taken place as seriously or as above board back then, but certainly I'm sure someone came to him and said, "Hey, we'll throw a little cheddar your way."
I know some of those, and he still went to Tech.
Yeah, and he still went to Tech. Forever one of the craziest things that you ever hear on the recruiting trail. Brian Smith, Locked on the Portal. All your portal and NIL discussion over there. Great as always. Appreciate everyone listening. I will see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.